24 on X and MiddleEast24.org.
Well, welcome, by the way, back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters, and we are honored to have with us Dan Feferman. And before we get started, and as you just heard, Dan is tell us a little bit about yourself, Dan, and tell us about your media platforms.
Sure. So I'm an American raised Israeli Middle East affairs and foreign affairs analyst and commentator. Did that a long time in the Israeli Defense Forces intelligence, as well as in the think tank world in Israel. And now I'm running a platform called Middle East 24, together with a team of fantastic journalists and analysts from around the Middle East, and providing around-the-clock coverage and analysis of and deep dives of what's happening in the Middle East from authentic perspectives of people on the ground.
Well, excellent, excellent. Listen, information is key. We always talk about that, and unbiased and unfiltered and honest is what's critical, especially in the Middle East. So let's jump into
Absolutely.
this. My first question to you, by the way, thanks for being on the show. I should say
Pleasure.
thank you. Do my loyal gratitude. And I love having guests with beards, even though one day I hope to grow a beard like yours, but that's long gone, I think. But okay, let's talk about Israel. What is Israel's plan in the Middle East? I know it's a broad topic, but let's try to break it down from there.
Yeah, you went straight for the easy questions, right? What is Israel's plans in the Middle East? Look, Israel's general plan in the Middle East, and I have to say, as someone who spent time on kind of the policy planning things and in the think tank world, Israel doesn't think too far ahead as far as policy planning, unfortunately. However, the general theme, the general status is we want peace, stability, and integration for Israel. And that's a broad statement that covers really the left to the right. Israel just wants to be accepted and integrated into the region. Israel wants security. Israel wants recognition. And the Abraham Accords showed us the promise of what happens when countries, especially economically stable and thriving ones like the UAE, like Bahrain, open up and welcome Israel into the region. In order to do that, we've realized over the years that this is a very rough neighborhood we live in, that there are foes who are absolutely, you can call it religiously, you can call it ideologically, committed to our destruction, to fighting us, to expelling us from this region day and night. That is not something new. That is something that existed since 1947, the year before we gained our independence. And over the years, you've had shifts between how much is the Israeli public, the Israeli voting body, willing to compromise, to sacrifice on its security for the sake of peace. I can kind of tell you now the consensus is, and this has kind of always been the Israeli mainstream thinking. We have to have a big sword in one hand, but the other hand is always extended towards peace with the region. And that's really what drives the big picture of Israeli regional thinking.
No, okay, so I agree. Listen, it is a rough neighborhood. I've worked in Israel. I've lived in the region. I mean, when Ehud Barak was prime minister, I did a lot of work there, so it's dating me a little bit. So years ago, worked on the Palestinian peace process and all that kind of stuff. And so, I've lived in the region, understand it, and it really is. I mean, when you live in a region where people want to kill you and don't think that you deserve a state, yeah, it's tough. It's like growing up in Bessemer, Alabama. Anyway, but not to joke about it from the standpoint of we talk about peace. A lot of people talk about Israel wants peace, yet all we see on TV is violence, 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 killing, 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 attacking Syria, attacking, is Iran. I mean, so how do we put those two things together? I mean, I understand
Sure.
about Iran. I fully understand about attacking Iran. Trust me. I think that the world should have done more to Iran years ago. But what's going on in Gaza? Where literally, no matter what calculation, tens of thousands of people have died or been killed. How do you justify that if you're
Yeah.
seeking peace?
Yeah, that's it's not always easy to explain. It's not always easy to understand, even from an internal Israeli perspective, as justified as the attack on Gaza might be. People really forget what happened on October 6th, 2023, right? Or I'll even go back to 2005. I'll go back to 2000, 2001, and people very selectively like to choose history. We had, as an Israeli public, made multiple attempts with the Palestinians, and you said you were here, you said you were covering that process or you're involved in it, to under the assumption that what they want is land and the result will be peace. And there were multiple attempts made by centrist, center left, even right of center governments to play along with that formula. If we just offer them what they say they're asking for, an end of the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, and some kind of shared land formula, there will be peace. 2000, that was offered by Ehud Barak. It was offered again in 2001. And that erupted not just in the lack of peace, but in the Second Intifada. That scarred Israelis on a very deep level because it told us no matter what we offer, there will never be peace in that sense. Ariel Sharon comes about 2003, 4, 5, and does something called the disengagement from Gaza, which was another attempt to say, you know what, they don't want to agree. Let's just get out of Gaza. Let's take out every last settler and soldier. And what we got was a Hamas state, and we didn't even realize the depth to which that Hamas had turned Gaza into the most sophisticated and heavily armed urban warfare fortress in the world. And there were 7 rounds, by my calculation, of fighting. We'll call them wars, mini wars, some of them 50 days, some of them a week, some of them a few days, instigated by Hamas since its takeover in 2006 of Gaza. There was a ceasefire in place. And Hamas violated that ceasefire, invaded southern Israel, and committed a massacre. And the only reason that massacre stopped at 1,200 civilians and 250 captured was because Israel managed to, with armed civilians, with police forces, with soldiers who literally just grabbed their weapons and drove south without any orders, conscription or reserve orders, just showed up and tried to do something. It took a whole day for Israel to recapture the villages, the kibbutzim, the farming communities of southern Israel. What that told the Israeli public was that Hamas cannot be allowed to remain in power in Gaza. Now, as far as I know, there's really only 3 ways that can happen. But you had, first of all, remember, a situation from October 7th onwards where you had 250 Israeli hostages, most of them civilians. We're talking about including children. We're talking about elderly people, sick people held in the worst kinds of conditions in captivity. You had a traumatized Israeli public that said, we cannot live next to this Hamas entity who, from October 7th and onward, was saying quite clearly in the press, we will do October 7th over and over and over again. They have made their intentions and their ability to carry out those intentions quite clear. And we're actually quite lucky that Hezbollah did not fully join in on a similar onslaught on northern Israel. And so, yes, we want peace, but we realize we have enemies who do not seek compromise. They don't seek to live alongside us. They seek to destroy us, to replace us. And what we learned on October 7th, and it was not an assessment taken seriously in the Israeli defense industry, which is why the intelligence lapse on October 7th is if we do not only take these threats seriously, but proactively go after and neutralize them and prevent the ability for these enemies to do their will, it will happen at one point or another to some extent or another. And so Hamas, Israeli planners, Israeli thinkers have long been thinking, we need to get rid of Hamas. There was a thinking until October 7th, maybe we can live alongside them. Maybe they are moderating. Maybe they are enjoying the taste of power and can be bought off. And that was the flawed strategy and the flawed thinking of Hamas prior to October 7th. Hamas has to be removed. And Hamas can only be removed in 3 ways. It has to be defeated and exiled. It has to step down voluntarily out of power, that is, surrender. Or the people of Gaza need to rise up and get rid of it, which is an immensely hard thing to do against a heavily armed, basically theocratic dictatorship that has ruled Gaza with an iron fist since 2006. So the option of leaving Hamas in power, I'll just end with this part, the leaving Hamas in power after October 7th, if anyone took it seriously prior to, all those illusions shattered, Hamas had to be gotten rid of, and then what is the way to do that?
No, listen, I 100% agree. Let me be very clear. What happened on October 7th is heinous. It's a war crime. It's brutal. It's evil. Should never have happened. I totally agree with that. But let's just and I agree with everything you're saying about
Sure.
Hamas cannot continue to be in power. I get it. I understand it. But let's just deal with the reality. Listen, you were able to, and I just be clear, I lived in Lebanon for a while. I worked on
Yeah.
anti-Hezbollah stuff and all that kind of stuff. But look at what you guys did masterfully, I'll say, with Hezbollah. You were able to neutralize them
Sure.
without destroying Lebanon. Okay, you were able to make great strides in Iran without destroying Tehran and killing thousands and thousands of innocent people. You're a military guy. You're a former major. I don't know if you're a current major, but you're a former major. But the reality is, this is what gets me. And I listen. I lived in Ukraine. I'm there during the war. I mean, I've been in war zones myself.
Sure.
The reality is, the what you see happening in Gaza with basically blanket bombing in many ways. I mean, how come the Israeli military did not use the same strategy against Hamas as they did against Hezbollah and against the Iranian regime? And look, there was a targeted strike against the Syrian military headquarters the other day. Didn't kill thousands of people. So why is it that everywhere else you have strategic strikes, but in Gaza you don't?
Yeah. I'll give you a couple different answers to that. The first one is um, you have to talk about the intelligence penetration of Hamas versus the intelligence penetration of Hezbollah and Iran. Here, again, we go back to the pre-October 7th faults on the side of Israel. We had lost the deep intelligence penetration of Hamas that we had on Hezbollah and on Iran. And that was a failure of national intelligence priorities, right? You have to choose what are your priorities. And on this, we failed too. You have to look at the goals. And this is something that people, I think, even people who are generally supportive and understand the need to go after Hamas, have to look at the goals. The goal with Hezbollah and the goal with Iran was never to overthrow the leadership, the regime, the government, to destroy the party. Hezbollah, the goal was to degrade its capabilities, to neutralize its capabilities, to take out significant parts of its leadership. The goal with Iran was from the very beginning incredibly limited. Push back the nuclear and ballistic missile programs a significant amount, right? And it was even clear to Israeli planners that this doesn't end the Iranian nuclear ballistic missile programs. It just pushes them back a year away. The goal with Hamas, and we can talk about is this the right goal, is this not the right goal, is to overthrow Hamas. To not just degrade its or stop its ability to launch another October 7th. The goal after October 7th became Hamas needs to be completely defeated, just like Nazi Germany was defeated, just like Imperial Japan was defeated. The ideology, the organization behind the ideology, Hamas's not just ability to conduct an October 7th, but Hamas's ability to rule Gaza. And then the question is how do you do that? And now I also have a hard time looking at the scenes of destruction in Gaza. I've looked and said, is it really necessary to have destroyed what is essentially 70, 80% of the buildings of the infrastructure in Gaza? Is it really necessary from a military perspective? I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not sure. I'm sure that there's a lot of intelligence that you and I don't have. I can tell you one of the big problems is the way Hamas fights wars. The Hamas had set up an infrastructure of 500 kilometers of tunnels. And these tunnels are some 50 meters underground, and they utilize the civilian infrastructure very cleverly in a way that it cannot be neutralized. The tunnel infrastructure cannot be neutralized without essentially, from what I understand from people currently in the Israeli military, I'm retired, is without destroying, unfortunately, the above ground Gaza, because there's a whole other Gaza that's below ground. Many soldiers I've talked to, people I know who have gone house to house, say there's literally a tunnel entrance in every house, every hospital, every tunnel, every Hamas underground headquarters is positioned under schools and hospitals and mosques, etc. It's not a cliche. And how does one go about rooting out Hamas, who has not stood and fought? That's not what Hamas does. From the very beginning, their goal was to suck the IDF into a protracted guerrilla urban warfare in which they would pop out of tunnels, in which they would booby trap tunnels, they would booby trap, they would use snipers, and get the IDF caught in a meat grinder. So the IDF said we have two options here, well, three options. One is to, do the Hezbollah model, which is essentially what the IDF has more or less done. And I've even suggested that at the beginning. Maybe the IDF should focus on pinpoint strikes, commando raids, intelligence operations, use international financial networks to choke off the money flow, crack down on the international legitimacy, get them booted out of Qatar and Turkey, etc. That's one option, but that doesn't defeat Hamas. Two, two is you have to draw them out because they're not in the streets fighting. They're popping out of tunnels. And so how do you do that without destroying the tunnels? And so these are not necessarily blanket bombings. They are destroying the cover for this tunnel infrastructure in order to destroy the tunnel infrastructure. And it's incredibly, incredibly messy, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. Well, messy is a polite way of putting it. Yeah, no. And once again, it's just, I mean, once again, you look around the world, more people are dying in the Middle East right now than any other part of the world in wars and conflicts, and it's just sad. Especially women and children. I mean, it really is sad.
I agree. I agree.
But putting that aside for a second, so a quick yes or no answer because we got 3 minutes left. Yes, is the two-state solution dead?
In its current format with the current leadership, and I have to say, from the current Israeli public opinion, yes. That said, going forward, I think it might be inevitable. And the question is can the regional actors finally get their act together, finally not just put forth a supposedly moderate Palestinian leadership, but a truly reformed Palestinian leadership? The Palestinian society has to undergo a deep re-education, de-radicalization, denazification, and transformation. They have to prove governance before autonomy or independence, something that the international community and Israel never insisted on. But long term, I really think it is the only viable path. And I'm talking 10, 20 years down the road, if all of these transformations are made. In the short term, it's impossible to discuss.
So would you put the Palestinians in the leadership in Gaza equivalent to what's happening in the West Bank? I mean, would you say the same is, I mean, would you say that there's a difference between Gaza and the West Bank?
The big difference between Gaza and the West Bank in this sense, between Fatah and Hamas, the PLO and Hamas, is that the PLO pragmatically realized that they're not going to defeat Israel and they need to cooperate or be a lot more pragmatic. That said, they have never publicly, I don't know if individual leaders publicly accepted Israel's existence as a Jewish state. They've never said it. They've always refused to say Israel as a Jewish state. and they've never implemented, they've never communicated that there will be peace next to the Israelis, alongside the Israelis. They've never stopped glorifying terrorists. They still pay terrorists. And so I think they are still deeply committed to one day expelling Israel, the what they believe is a Western colonialist power, and not accepting Israel as what it is, indigenous people who have returned to their homeland. And they're just more pragmatic about it, realizing that fighting against Israel and destroying their own society in the process harms them, but they haven't taken the positive steps in order to actually fundamentally and deeply transform their societies, which is what is needed.
Well, listen, Dan, sadly we have to go, but listen, I appreciate it. And listen, I'll say once again, Middle East 24. Visit all the platforms, Middle East 24. You're a very good speaker on this issue, and I wish more people, my viewers, would check it out. Anyway, thanks for being on the show, and hopefully we'll talk again in the future. Thanks for joining Dane Waters with Around the World with Dane Waters. And next week, we'll be talking about elephants, believe it or not. But we'll talk more about that later. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.